When we picture a royal tiara, our minds conjure images of untouchable treasures, symbols of everlasting power and dynastic legacy. We envision dazzling relics, safeguarded for centuries in armored vaults, passed down from mother to daughter, and bearing silent witness to grand galas and tragic revolutions. The destiny of such jewels seems preordained. They are destined to outlive their wearers, becoming indelible chapters in history. Such was the fate of the famous emerald tiara of Queen Elena of Savoy, consort to Italian King Victor Emmanuel III. It wasn't merely a piece of jewelry, it was a masterpiece of haute joaillerie, crafted by the House of Musée with 5 colossal Colombian emeralds and a dazzling cascade of diamonds. Majestic, towering, and truly regal, it was fashioned to adorn the head of the queen of one of Europe's greatest powers. But what if I were to tell you that this treasure, whose worth rivaled the coffers of a minor nation, vanished not in the flames of revolution, nor was it pilfered by audacious thieves? Its story met a far more paradoxical end. This very tiara, along with other crown jewels, was willingly sold by the queen herself. And she did so not for personal caprice, not to acquire a new palace or a lavish yacht. Queen Elena divested herself of this symbol of her power to settle her nation's war debts after the First World War. This act, inconceivable for most monarchs of that era, shatters the conventional image of a queen awash in luxury. It transforms the tale of a beautiful bauble into a profound human drama. This compels us to pose the central question of our inquiry. Who was this enigmatic woman, Elena of Montenegro, scorned in Russia, yet adored in Italy? What compelled her to undertake an action that challenges everything we once believed about the essence of royal power? I invite you now to embark on a journey to unravel the enigma of a queen who prized duty above diamonds, and whose narrative proved far more intricate and heart-wrenching than the glittering facade of her emerald tiara. To truly grasp Queen Elena's extraordinary act, we must journey back to her origins, to the crucible that forged her character. Our story begins not in the opulent halls of an Italian palace, but amidst the rugged yet majestic mountains of Montenegro. Elena was the daughter of King Nicola I, sovereign of a small but fiercely proud kingdom nestled within the Balkans. In the grand geopolitical chessboard of the late 19th century, King Nicola possessed one singularly invaluable asset: his daughters. They served as his primary instruments for forging alliances, veritable commodities in the marketplace of dynastic marriages. It was with this very mission that young Elena, alongside her sisters Milica and Stana, journeyed to the heart of the mighty Russian Empire, St. Petersburg. They were enrolled in the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, a veritable finishing school for perfect aristocrats, where they were to acquire a brilliant education and, far more crucially, secure advantageous marriages, thereby solidifying the bonds between Montenegro and Russia. Yet it was here, within the austere corridors of Smolny, that the sisters' paths irrevocably began to diverge. Milica and Stana dove headfirst into the maelstrom of court intrigues. They became notorious as the Montenegrin princesses, exotic, imperious women, captivated by mysticism and unafraid to weave intricate conspiracies. It was they, as history recounts, who would introduce the ominous figure of Grigory Rasputin to the court of Nicholas II, forever etching their names into the tragic annals of Russian history. Elena, however, was different. She absorbed knowledge, immersed herself in languages and art, but deliberately steered clear of her sister's political machinations and spiritualist seances. Contemporaries described her as a young woman of refined appearance and, far more significantly, possessing a gentle, benevolent, and compassionate disposition. While Milica and Stana masterminded their schemes, Elena cultivated a reputation as an individual of profound compassion. She was a product of the same milieu, yet her inner essence proved entirely distinct. However, the sisters' notoriety cast a long, ominous shadow over her. Within Russia's upper echelons, Elena was regarded with suspicion, perceived merely as another ambitious member of the Montenegrin clan. This undeserved reputation shadowed her for many years. Yet it was precisely this detachment from intrigue, this innate purity, that prepared her for the encounter that would ultimately define her entire life and lead her to the throne of Italy. Everything changed in 1896, in Moscow, at the coronation of Emperor Nicholas II. It was an event of planetary scale, a grand spectacle drawing all of Europe's aristocracy. For most attendees, it was an arena for diplomatic maneuvering and displays of power. But for 23-year-old Elena of Montenegro, this day proved fateful. In the whirlwind of balls and official receptions, she found herself seated at the same table as the heir to the Italian throne, Prince Victor Emmanuel of Savoy. At first glance, they were complete opposites. Elena, tall, statuesque, a graceful beauty from the Slavic world. Victor Emmanuel, a man of extremely short stature, only 153 centimeters tall, reserved, and, to many, utterly unheroic in appearance. But amidst this kaleidoscope of formalities and etiquette, something unfolded that could not be staged. A spark ignited between them. This was not a calculated match, but a genuine, instantaneous attraction between two individuals who saw not titles in each other, but kindred spirits. This suddenly blossoming romance became the first serious disruption of the status quo. It was a challenge to the entire established order. For the marriage of the heir to Catholic Italy and an Orthodox Montenegrin princess was not merely a union of two people, it was a political and religious precedent, and it demanded a sacrifice. To become the future king's wife, Elena had to abandon the faith of her ancestors and convert to Catholicism. And here it was, the first crack in the perfect facade, the first true intrigue. This decision became Elena's first significant trial. Her own mother, Queen Milena, vehemently opposed it and even refused to attend her daughter's wedding, unable to reconcile herself with Elena's choice. Elena wasn't merely choosing between men, she was choosing between her past and her future, between loyalty to her family and a love that promised her a crown but demanded a piece of her soul in return. The wedding took place, but instead of a fairy tale ending, it spawned a new, unexpected problem. When their wedding photographs circulated across Europe, they provoked not admiration, but ridicule. The stark height difference between the towering bride and the diminutive groom made them subjects of caricature. They were immediately dubbed the comical couple. And this was more than just an amusing misunderstanding. It was the first collision of their personal happiness with ruthless public opinion, the first hint that their shared path would be fraught with trials, forcing them to contend not only with political adversaries, but with the prejudices of the entire world. Behind the mockery of the Italian couple lay a drama far deeper than a simple difference in height. To understand it, we must look behind the curtain of Italian politics of that era. The Kingdom of Italy, which we now take for granted, was still a very young and fragile state at the turn of the century. Its unification process, the Risorgimento, had concluded only a couple of decades prior. The Savoy monarchy had not yet managed to sink deep roots into the national consciousness, and it desperately lacked historical legitimacy and widespread public affection. Under these circumstances, the monarch's persona took on colossal significance. And Victor Emmanuel III, the heir apparent, was a constant source of anxiety for the old aristocracy. His complex regarding his small stature was not merely a personal issue. In an era when a king was expected to be an authoritative, masculine symbol of the nation, the prince's almost caricatured appearance was perceived as a threat to the prestige of the entire dynasty. His persistent habit of wearing thick-soled shoes and tall hats was less a comical eccentricity than a desperate attempt to conform to an image that was physically unattainable for him. Elena, upon arriving in Italy, faced her own distinct set of challenges. She was a foreigner from a small Balkan country, an Orthodox princess at a Catholic court. The lingering shadow of her sister's dubious reputation as schemers followed her, and the Italian elite looked down on her, expecting to see just another ambitious upstart. She needed not simply to become queen, she needed to earn the right to be queen, to win the love and trust of a nation that was initially skeptical. And here, their seeming imperfections transformed into their greatest strengths. Their union was more than just a love match. It proved to be a brilliant political symbiosis. Victor Emmanuel offered Elena a throne and status, and she, in turn, gave him precisely what he lacked: human warmth, popular appeal, grace, and a sense of dignity that cannot be measured in centimeters. He was the brain and symbol of state power. She became its heart and soul. Together, they were not a comical, but a perfectly balanced couple, capable of fortifying a precarious throne. A pivotal role in this unspoken strategy was played by Victor Emmanuel's mother, the formidable and beloved Queen Margherita of Savoy. Understanding the vulnerability of her son's position, she made a brilliant move. That very emerald tiara, given to Elena as a wedding gift, was crafted from Margherita's personal jewels. This was no mere gift from a mother-in-law. It was a public gesture of power transfer and benediction. By relinquishing her emeralds and diamonds, the Queen Mother symbolically endowed her foreign daughter-in-law with a portion of her own legitimacy and glory, silencing all critics. The tiara became for Elena not just an ornament, but a coronation act that ushered her into the very heart of the dynasty. Having taken her place on the throne, Elena of Montenegro found herself at the epicenter of an invisible war. This wasn't a battle for territory or political influence, but a clash of two fundamentally different conceptions of what royal power should embody in the 20th century. On one side stood the age-old tradition, the concept of the icon queen. On the other, her own innovative vision of the servant queen. The icon queen model was what was expected of her. It was the image of a monarch as a living national symbol, a distant and unapproachable figure whose primary task was to dazzle. The queen in this paradigm was the central element of the state spectacle. She was expected to wear the most expensive gowns, the most blinding jewels, to preside over balls and launch battleships. Her emerald tiara was the perfect instrument for this role, a sign of immutable grandeur and wealth intended to inspire awe and admiration. It was a cold, detached, yet time-tested method of asserting authority. But Elena, with her Smolny upbringing and innate empathy, gambled on an entirely different, almost revolutionary concept for the time. She instinctively understood that in a young, tumultuous Italy, torn by social contradictions, old methods no longer worked. For the monarchy to survive, it had to prove its utility to the people. The love of subjects could no longer be inherited or demanded. It had to be earned, and Elena chose the path of service. We see this conflict of ideas in action through the most striking example. In the evening, at an official reception, she might appear resplendent in her emerald tiara, fulfilling the protocol role of an icon queen as etiquette demanded. But the very next day, the tiara would be returned to the vault, and the queen herself, shedding silks and diamonds, would don a simple nurse's apron and go to hospitals and orphanages. She didn't merely donate money to charity, as many before her had done. She personally bandaged the wounded, comforted the suffering, and organized aid for those affected by earthquakes and epidemics. This was neither posturing nor political calculation. It was her very essence. While her sisters in Russia attempted to govern an empire through mystical salons and palace intrigues, Elena governed the hearts of Italians through direct, human engagement. She consciously contrasted the cold glitter of jewels with the warmth of living compassion. And in this battle for popular affection, she achieved an undisputed victory. Italians, who had initially viewed her with distrust, saw in her not a foreigner on the throne, but a mother of the nation, their Mamma Regina. Her kindness and selflessness became a far more solid pillar for the dynasty than all the treasures of the House of Savoy. Elena didn't merely play a role, she forged a new one, proving that the true power of a crown lies not in its weight, but in its ability to lighten the burdens of its people. For years, Elena meticulously built her image as a servant queen, brick by brick, winning the nation's affection. Her philanthropy was sincere, her compassion genuine. But all of this was merely a prelude. The true test, one that would challenge the very core of her convictions and the essence of her authority, lay ahead. And it arrived in 1914. The First World War erupted. The spectacle was over. The glitter of ballrooms was replaced by the glow of fires, and the music of waltzes drowned in the roar of artillery. For Italy, entering the war on the side of the Entente, the darkest days had dawned. And at this moment, Queen Elena did what she did best. She went to her people. But this time, not with solace and donations. She transformed the Quirinal Palace, her residence, into a hospital, and having herself obtained a nursing diploma, stood at the operating table. Every day, she witnessed the true cost of this war. She saw pain, suffering, death. The Queen of Italy, in a simple white coat, assisted in surgeries, changed bandages, held the hands of dying soldiers. This was no longer a clash of ideas. It was reality itself in its most brutal manifestation. She saw her country bleeding dry, destinies shattered, and families ruined. The war ended in victory, but it was a Pyrrhic one. Italy emerged wounded, devastated, and most terrifyingly, on the brink of complete bankruptcy. The state treasury was empty, and war debts to the Allies seemed insurmountable. The nation, which had paid for victory with hundreds of thousands of lives, now faced humiliating financial collapse. And here, at this point of absolute despair, occurs the pivotal event of our investigation. An unexpected revelation that changes everything. It is not a newly discovered document, nor a secret testimony. It is a decision, made in the quiet of the palace chambers by one person. Queen Elena, witnessing the politicians' helplessness, understood that symbolic gestures were no longer sufficient. An act capable of shaking the very foundations was needed. She amassed all her personal jewels. Everything gifted for her wedding, every heirloom she possessed, every last item that made up her royal treasure trove. And topping that formidable list was the majestic emerald tiara from Mussi, a potent symbol of her coronation, her authority, and her embrace by the House of Savoy. She put it all on the block, including this most cherished emblem of her grandeur. This was no mere financial maneuver. It was an act of astonishing symbolic self-sacrifice. The Queen willingly stripped herself of the very trappings of power to redeem her nation's honor. The proceeds from the sale were handed over to the state to settle its crushing war debts. In that instant, history ceased to be a simple tale of a beautiful tiara. It blossomed into the legend of a queen who laid her crown upon the altar of the homeland. The rules of the game were rewritten forever. Monarchy was no longer just a symbol. It had become a savior. The Queen's gesture exploded like a bombshell. But it was a bombshell not of destruction, but of creation. By liquidating her treasures, Elena didn't merely chip away at the debt. She accomplished something far more profound. She gifted a battered nation a new faith. A belief that monarchy wasn't a burden, but a buttress. Her popularity soared to stratospheric heights. She became untouchable. A living saint whose name was uttered with reverence in the humblest hovels and by veterans hunkered down in the trenches. In that moment, she crossed her Rubicon. By selling the tiara, she burned every bridge behind her, severing ties with the carefree world of iconic queens. She could no longer simply don beautiful gowns and wave from a balcony. She had forever entwined her destiny with that of the common people. Henceforth, her authority was measured not by the carats in her crown, but by the depth of trust in the hearts of the Italian people. There was no turning back, only forward, hand in hand with her nation, wherever that path might lead. But in the vacuum left by the shattered old world, a monster began to stir. War didn't just bankrupt treasuries, it poisoned souls. Millions of veterans returned home, finding neither work nor respect. Economic chaos, the specter of communism, and a searing national humiliation created the perfect breeding ground for a new, aggressive ideology. And that ideology had a name: fascism. And it had a leader, a former journalist, a charismatic and ruthless demagogue named Benito Mussolini. The conflict escalated to a fever pitch. This was no longer Elena's struggle against abstract tradition. It was a clash between two competing models for Italy's salvation. On one side stood her path, a path of compassion, mercy, and the slow, organic unification of a nation around its monarch. On the other, Mussolini's path, offering swift and brutal solutions, order through violence, unity through suppression, and national grandeur through dictatorship. The fascist blackshirts were amassing strength, their marches growing bolder, their shadow lengthening. And now, the stakes were at their absolute zenith. No longer was it about settling war debts or the popularity of the royal family. The soul of Italy hung in the balance. King Victor Emmanuel found himself squeezed between a weakening parliament and a surging Mussolini. Every decision he faced was fraught with dire consequences. Should he uphold legitimate authority and risk plunging the nation into civil war? Or should he yield to force, appointing Mussolini as prime minister to preserve peace and the crown, but betraying every democratic ideal? The tragic irony was that Elena's act, her profound sacrifice meant to save the nation, had merely paved the way for a new, even more terrifying threat. She had given the monarchy an immense reserve of public trust, and now that very trust had to be gambled in the final play. They no longer had room for error. The fate not only of their dynasty, but of all of Europe, hinged on their next move. And then came October of 1922. Mussolini's blackshirts were marching on Rome. At this pivotal moment, the puzzle of our history began to click into place with chilling clarity. All the threads of the narrative, the Queen's sacrifice, her popular adoration, the King's fear of chaos, and his deep-seated inferiority complex, converged at a single point. Before Victor Emmanuel III lay a decree for a state of emergency, which would empower the army to halt the fascists by force. He held the fate of Italy in his hands, and he made his choice. He refused to sign. Instead of ordering his troops to fire, he invited Mussolini to the palace and appointed him prime minister. To the world, this was an act of surrender, a betrayal of democracy. But for the king himself, it was an act of desperate salvation. He was consumed by a panicked dread of civil war, which he was convinced would tear the young, nascent nation to shreds. In his eyes, the choice was not between democracy and dictatorship, but between dictatorship and total annihilation. And he chose what he believed to be the lesser evil. And it is here, in this deafening silence, that we uncover the answer to our central question. Where was Queen Elena? She did not intervene, did not plot, did not attempt to sway her husband. She was simply there. Her support was silent, yet absolute. She believed in her husband and his agonizing decision. Her philosophy of service extended not only to the people, but to the king. Her sacrifice, the soul Tiara, had endowed him with the moral authority he now wielded to legitimize the power of fascism, convinced that by doing so, he was saving the nation. It is at this precise moment that the puzzle truly falls into place. The decision to sell the tiara to pay off debt and the decision to cede power to Mussolini to prevent civil war were not two disparate actions. They were manifestations of the same tragic logic. This was the hallmark of monarchs for whom the paramount value was the unity of the state, not abstract ideals. They were willing to sacrifice anything, symbols of power, principles, freedom, if it meant preserving the country's integrity. The sale of the tiara was not merely an act of compassion. It was the first rehearsal for a much grander sacrifice, a prelude to the moment when democracy itself would be laid upon the altar of national unity. For 20 years, the royal couple lived in a gilded cage, more hostages than rulers under Mussolini's regime. They were king and queen, stripped of real power, watching as their country plunged into the darkness of dictatorship and became embroiled in a new global conflict allied with Hitler's regime. But history had one final, decisive turn in store. In 1943, as defeat in the war became undeniable, Victor Emmanuel, that same small and indecisive king, performed the most audacious act of his life. Relying on loyal military circles, he summoned Mussolini to the palace and ordered his arrest. The man who had elevated the dictator to power was now the one who toppled him. This was his final argument, his desperate attempt to undo the fateful mistake of 20 years prior. But it was already too late. This act did not save the monarchy. After the war, the Italian people did not forgive the king his initial compromise with fascism. They had saved the country from Mussolini, but in the process, they had lost everything. This was the ultimate, most cruel piece of the puzzle. Their greatest sacrifice, the renunciation of power for unity, ultimately cost them both their authority and their homeland. The enigma of the queen who sold the tiara was solved. She was part of a duo who placed the unity of their country above all else and who were prepared to pay any price for it. The king's courageous, desperate act, Mussolini's arrest, did not bring salvation. It was rather the death throes of a doomed system. Instead of gratitude, the royal family received only a brief respite before the final verdict. Amidst the ashes of the Second World War, a liberated yet humiliated Italy had to decide how to forge its future, and it delivered its judgment. In June of 1946, a referendum was held that drew a definitive line under the history of the House of Savoy. In a last desperate bid to save the crown, Victor Emmanuel abdicated the throne in favor of his son, Umberto II. But it was too late. The Italian people, remembering 2 decades of fascism, chose a republic. The monarchy, which Elena and Victor Emmanuel had tried to save at any cost, was abolished. The consequences for them were personal and devastating. The king and queen, who had considered Italy their very flesh and blood, were exiled from the country. They became refugees, forever stripped of the right to set foot on the land they had ruled for almost half a century. Their kingdom, once stretching from the Alps to Sicily, shrank to the confines of their memories and a handful of suitcases. Their final refuge was found in exile, in Egypt, far from their beloved homeland, which had now become a foreign land to them. And here, the fate of that very emerald tiara becomes a perfect metaphor for the destiny of the monarchy itself. Sold at a moment of great sacrifice, it vanished without a trace. No one knows what became of it. Perhaps it was broken down into individual stones, its grandeur shattered into pieces, just like its owner's kingdom. Or perhaps it remains to this day in a secret collection, a silent artifact of a bygone era. Its disappearance is a symbol of the complete and utter collapse of the world it once crowned. Thus, our understanding of Queen Elena has also transformed. From a simple story of a kind and compassionate ruler, it has morphed into a complex Greek tragedy. We see how her greatest virtue, her devotion to duty and to her husband, became part of a mechanism that led to catastrophe. She was neither villain nor saint. She was a tragic heroine whose love for her country and faith in her king proved powerless against the relentless march of history, a march they themselves had set in motion. We began our exploration with a shocking fact. A queen sold her magnificent tiara, shattering our stereotype of the inviolability of royal treasures. Now, having journeyed to the tragic finale, we understand that this was not merely an event, but a manifesto. This act was the key to the entire philosophy of Elena and Victor Emmanuel's rule. They sincerely believed their mission was to preserve Italy's unity and integrity at absolutely any cost. Initially, the price was measured in carats of emeralds and diamonds. Then, it was measured in democratic freedoms. And therein lies the main, universal, and terrifying lesson of this story. Humanity's greatest virtues, compassion, self-sacrifice, devotion to duty, can, in the ruthless grind of grand politics, become fuel for the greatest evil. The public affection Elena earned through her genuine kindness became the moral shield behind which her husband made a fateful compromise, ceding power to Mussolini. Their noble aspiration to save the country from civil war ultimately plunged it into the abyss of dictatorship and global catastrophe. This story compels us to forever abandon a black and white view of history. It teaches that there are no simple solutions, and that a path paved with the best intentions can indeed lead to hell. Elena of Montenegro is not merely a good queen from a children's story. She is an immensely complex, tragic figure whose personal moral compass proved powerless against the magnetic storms of the 20th century. Her life is an eternal reminder that love and duty can be both a creative and a destructive force. Now, when you hear the name Elena of Savoy again, you will recall not only her compassion, you will remember the unbearable weight of the choices faced by those entrusted with power. How easily one can mistake saving a nation for enslaving it, and how sometimes the most resonant act is not the clinking of jewels, but the deafening silence of their absence. Queen Elena's emerald tiara vanished, and this is symbolic. It was sold to save Italy, but in the end, neither the tiara, nor the monarchy, nor the pre-war world could be saved. Only a legend remains, one that has forever altered our perception of power and the price paid for it. For the true value of that tiara was not measured in money, but in consequences. And this story will forever stand as a testament to the fact that the heaviest stone in any crown is not a diamond or an emerald. It is the stone of choice, which a ruler must make between what feels right and what they believe is necessary.